A billionaire stripped of his fortune found redemption in a small Atlanta cafe, and the woman who hired him changed his life forever. Welcome to the heartfelt journey of William Crawford, a man who had it all, until his fathers were forced him to lose everything. To inherit his family's billion-dollar empire, William must live as an ordinary man for a year, hiding his true identity and surviving on his own. When he steps into Naomi's Nook Cafe, soaking wet and desperate, he meets Naomi Young, a single mother whose kindness sparks a transformation he never expected. But his stepmother, Helena, will stop at nothing to steal his inheritance. Will William find true wealth in love and humility, or will pride and greed win? Join us as we uncover a story of second chances, where kindness outshines status, and true wealth lies in the heart. Before we begin, share where you're reading from, and let us know what you think of William and Naomi's journey at the end. Let's dive into a tale that reminds us what really matters. Hi, my beautiful family. Let's start with a blessing. Dear Lord, I ask you to surround every person watching with peace, healing, and endless love. Amen. You are not just an audience. You are my family, the reason I push through on the hardest days. For those who are new here, welcome to the family. Please subscribe, say hello in the comments, and let's grow closer together. Each story I bring is my sacrifice and devotion. When you walk away early, it feels like my heart is left unheard. Please, stay with me through the journey until the very end. I love you always. Now let us begin. Rain poured over Manhattan, heavy and relentless, as mourners gathered at the Crawford family mansion. William Crawford stood by his father's portrait, his tailored suit masking a heart heavy with grief and isolation. Across the room, his stepmother, Helena Crawford, offered a smile as cold as the marble floors. Her eyes glinted with something dangerous, ambition. As the memorial ended, she leaned close and whispered, "Your father left you a challenge, William. I hope you're ready." In the lawyer's office atop Crawford Tower, the air grew thick with tension. The elderly attorney adjusted his glasses and read aloud. To inherit Crawford Investments, William must live without his fortune for 1 year, survive on his own labor, and reveal his identity to no one. Failure transfers the estate to Helena Crawford. William's heart pounded. "This can't be real," he said, voice cracking. "It's very real," Helena purred, her smile sharp. "Good luck, William. You'll need it." That night, William packed a single duffel bag, boarded a bus to Atlanta, and watched Manhattan's skyline fade into the rain. "If I have to lose everything to find myself," he whispered, "then so be it." The rain hammered Atlanta's streets, a relentless curtain that blurred the city's edges and swallowed its lights. William Crawford stepped off the bus, his duffel bag slung over one shoulder, the weight of his father's will heavier than the soaked fabric clinging to his skin. Manhattan's glittering skyline was gone, replaced by the gritty pulse of a city that didn't know his name. "If I have to lose everything to find myself," he'd whispered on the bus, "then so be it." Now, standing in the downpour, those words felt like a vow he wasn't sure he could keep. He wandered, head down, until a warm glow caught his eye through the storm. A small sign flickered above a modest storefront, Naomi's Nook Cafe. The windows were fogged, but inside, soft light spilled over wooden tables, promising shelter. His stomach growled. He hadn't eaten since morning, his last $10 spent on the bus ticket. He pushed open the door, the bell jingling faintly. Inside, the air smelled of fresh coffee and warm bread, a stark contrast to the cold rain. The cafe was empty, save for a woman behind the counter, wiping it down with steady, practiced motions. Naomi Young was 32, black, with a face that carried both strength and weariness. Her braided hair was pulled back, and her apron was flecked with flour from a long day's work. She was the kind of woman who didn't bend. Not for grief, not for bills, not for the world that tried to break her. Naomi glanced up, her eyes narrowing as she took in the stranger. Tall, unshaven, his hoodie dripping onto her clean floor. His sharp blue eyes, though, held something she couldn't quite place. Desperation, yes, but also a quiet resolve. "Ma'am," he said, voice low, "I don't want charity. I just need work." Naomi set down her rag, hands on her hips. She'd seen plenty of folks like him, down on their luck, passing through, looking for a handout or a hustle. But something about his posture, the way he didn't flinch under her gaze, made her pause. "You ever waited tables before?" she asked, her tone sharp but not unkind. "Once," he said, the lie slipping out easily. He'd dined in restaurants where a single meal cost more than her weekly payroll, but he'd never carried a tray. "You willing to learn?" He nodded, water dripping from his hood. Naomi studied him a moment longer, then jerked her head toward the back. "Then you start tomorrow. Pays small, but the food's good." William's lips twitched. A faint smile, the first in days. "Thank you." "Don't thank me," Naomi said, her own smile breaking through, soft but firm. "Just show up." She turned back to her counter, but her mind lingered on the stranger. Atlanta was full of lost souls, and Naomi's nook was their harbor. Delivery drivers, night shift nurses, old veterans swapping stories over pie. She didn't have much, but she had this place, built from the ashes of her husband's death 3 years ago. The cafe was her defiance, her promise to her son, Caleb, that they'd make it no matter what. In the back room, Caleb slept on a cot, his 10-year-old frame curled under a worn blanket. His math homework lay unfinished on a crate beside him, a pencil tucked behind his ear. Naomi's heart softened as she adjusted the blanket, brushing a hand over his tight curls. He was her why, the reason she worked double shifts, baked through the night, and smiled through the ache in her bones. William lingered by the door, unsure if he should leave. The rain hadn't let up, and the thought of another night in a shelter made his chest tighten. Naomi noticed, her eyes flicking to his soaked shoes. "There's a cot in the storage room," she said, not looking up. "It's not much, but it's dry." He hesitated, pride warring with exhaustion. "I don't want to impose." "You're not," she said, her voice final. "Just don't make a mess." He nodded, grateful, and followed her to a cramped room stacked with flour sacks and coffee beans. The cot was narrow, the mattress thin, but to William, it was a palace compared to the streets. Morning came too soon, the storm replaced by a grey drizzle. Naomi's nook buzzed with early regulars, construction workers grabbing coffee, a librarian reading in the corner. Naomi moved like a conductor, flipping pancakes, refilling mugs, and calling out orders with a rhythm that felt like home. Caleb, now awake, sat at a corner table, scribbling in his notebook while sneaking bites of toast. William stepped out of the storage room, his hoodie swapped for a borrowed apron that hung awkwardly on his broad frame. Naomi handed him a notepad and a pen. "Start with table 3. They want coffee and eggs. Don't spill." He nodded, nerves twisting in his gut. He'd negotiated billion-dollar deals, but carrying a coffee pot felt like defusing a bomb. His first attempt was clumsy. Coffee sloshed onto the saucer, earning a good-natured laugh from the customer, a grizzled man in a flannel shirt. "New guy, huh?" the man said, winking at Naomi. "You gotta train this one." "He'll learn," Naomi replied, her tone light but firm. William did learn slowly. He swept floors, bussed tables, and memorized orders, his hands growing steadier each day. Naomi watched, her sharp eyes catching his effort, his quiet determination. He wasn't like the others who'd come and gone, promising work, but disappearing when the shifts got hard. This man, whoever he was, showed up. Caleb noticed too. The boy was shy at first, peeking at William from behind his sketchbook. But one morning, when William fixed a wobbly table without being asked, Caleb piped up, "You're pretty strong, mister." William chuckled, surprised. "Thanks, kid. You're pretty sharp yourself." Naomi overheard, her lips curving. Caleb didn't warm to strangers easily, not since his father's death. Yet here he was, sketching William's face in his notebook, all sharp angles and messy hair. Days became weeks. William found a rhythm in the cafe's chaos, a strange comfort in its simplicity. He fixed a leaky faucet, rewired a flickering light, and learned to pour coffee without splashing, mostly. Naomi teased him about his city hands, but her laughter was warm, softening the edges of his shame. For the first time in years, he felt useful, not as a name on a boardroom door, but as a man who showed up. One evening, after closing, Naomi found him outside, staring at the Atlanta skyline. The city's lights glittered, a faint echo of Manhattan's glow. "You got someone back home?" she asked, leaning against the doorframe. William hesitated, his past a shadow he couldn't share. "Not anymore." She nodded, her eyes kind but searching. "Then you got us for now." The words were simple, but they landed like a lifeline. William looked at her, really looked, and saw a woman who'd built a world from nothing, who gave without expecting anything back. He didn't know it yet, but Naomi's nook was becoming his sanctuary, and Naomi herself, a mirror reflecting the man he might become. But in New York, Helena Crawford sat in her penthouse, a glass of wine in hand, plotting her next move. She'd already sent an investigator to Atlanta, and the report on her desk confirmed it. William was working in a cafe, playing the pauper. She smirked, dialing a number. Let's make sure his little game ends soon. The storm might have passed, but for William and Naomi, a bigger one was brewing. The neon sign above Naomi's Nook Cafe buzzed faintly, casting a warm glow over the wet Atlanta pavement. Inside, the last customer had left, and the air held the lingering scent of coffee and cinnamon. William Crawford stood behind the counter, his borrowed apron stained with coffee grounds, staring at a mop as if it were an alien artifact. Helena Crawford's smirk lingered in his mind, her voice taunting. "Good luck playing poor, William." But here, in this small cafe, he was starting to feel something new. Not pride, not power, but possibility. William's first week at Naomi's Nook was a humbling blur. He was clumsy, his hands more suited to signing contracts than balancing trays. Coffee sloshed over cup rims, plates wobbled in his grip, and once he tripped over a chair, sending a fork skittering across the floor. The regulars, truck drivers, nurses, an old man named Earl who always ordered pie, watched with amusement, their laughter softening the sting of his mistakes. Naomi, wiping down the counter, caught him fumbling a coffee pot. "You pour coffee like you're allergic to gravity," she said, her voice laced with playful scorn. William froze, then let out a laugh, a real one, raw and unguarded, the first in months. It startled him, the sound foreign in his throat. Naomi's eyes twinkled, and for a moment, the weight of Manhattan felt a little lighter. Caleb, Naomi's 10-year-old son, was a quiet shadow at first, sketching in his notebook or doing homework at a corner table. But he watched William closely, his dark eyes curious. One morning, as William swept the floor, Caleb piped up, "You're not bad at this, Mr. Will." "Mr. Will?" William raised an eyebrow, amused. "Yeah," Caleb said, grinning. "Sounds cooler than William." William chuckled, ruffling the boy's curls before catching himself. The gesture felt natural, but it stirred something unfamiliar, a warmth he hadn't known he craved. Caleb's grin widened, and from then on, Mr. Will stuck. William threw himself into the work, determined to prove he could survive without his fortune. He learned to clear tables without knocking over glasses, and to take orders without forgetting the extra ketchup. But it was the small fixes that came naturally. When the cafe's espresso machine sputtered, he spent an evening tinkering with it, his fingers remembering skills from a college summer spent rebuilding cars. By morning, it hummed smoothly, earning a rare nod from Naomi. "You're handy," she said, pouring him a coffee. "Where'd you learn that?" William shrugged, deflecting. "Picked it up somewhere." His business instincts itched to surface. Ways to streamline the cafe's inventory, boost its margins, but he swallowed them down. His father's will demanded he hide his past, and besides, Naomi didn't need a boardroom strategist. She needed someone who showed up. As days turned to weeks, the cafe became his rhythm. He memorized the regulars' orders. Earl's cherry pie, no ice in the librarian's tea. He stayed late, scrubbing counters until they gleamed, and fixed a flickering light above the counter, its soft glow now steady. Naomi noticed, her sharp eyes catching the care he put into every task. She didn't say much, but her teasing softened, her smiles lingered. One evening, as they locked up, Naomi sighed, her shoulders slumping. William paused, broom in hand. "You okay?" She hesitated, then sat on a stool, her hands twisting a rag. "Bills are piling up," she admitted. "Rent's overdue, and the bank's breathing down my neck. This place, it's all I've got for Caleb. After my husband," she stopped, her voice catching. "He died in a car accident 2 years ago. Drunk driver. Left us with nothing but debt and this cafe." William's chest tightened. He wanted to fix it, to write a check, pull strings, anything. But his hidden account was dwindling, and his identity was a secret he couldn't break. "I'm sorry," he said, the words feeling small. Naomi shook her head. "Don't be. I keep going because Caleb deserves better. This place, these people, it's home." William nodded, her strength humbling him. He'd built an empire, but Naomi had built something greater, a life that mattered. That night, after Caleb was tucked into his cot in the back room, Naomi found William sitting outside under the neon cafe sign. Its pink and blue light bathed his face, softening the sharp lines of his jaw. He stared at the skyline, lost in thought. "You got someone waiting back home?" Naomi asked, leaning against the wall, her voice gentle. William's gaze dropped to his hands, rougher now from weeks of work. "Not anymore," he said quietly. The truth was heavier. His Manhattan life, his family name, the boardroom battles, all felt like a distant dream. Helena's schemes loomed, but here, under this sign, they couldn't touch him. Naomi studied him, her eyes searching. "Then you got us for now." The words landed like a quiet promise, simple but profound. William looked at her, really saw her. The woman who'd given him a chance when he was just a drenched stranger, who carried her grief with grace, who built a home for lost souls. For the first time, someone saw him not as a Crawford, not as a fortune, but as a man. His heart stirred, a quiet admiration blooming for the woman who was teaching him what it meant to be whole. He smiled faintly. "That's more than enough." Naomi returned the smile, then nodded toward the cafe. "Come on, Mr. Will. Dishes won't wash themselves." As they walked back inside, the neon sign flickered above them, a beacon in the dark. But in New York, Helena Crawford sat in her office, a photo of William sweeping the cafe floor on her desk. Her investigator's report was clear. He was settling in, getting too comfortable. She dialed a number, her voice cold. "Time to tighten the screws. Let's see how long he lasts." For William, the taste of humility was bittersweet, but it was also the first time he'd felt alive. Yet the storm he'd left behind in Manhattan was gathering strength, and it was headed straight for Naomi's nook. William Crawford leaned against the counter, his apron loose around his shoulders, watching Naomi lock up. Her words from earlier echoed in his mind. "Then you got us for now." They were a lifeline, tethering him to a life he was only beginning to understand. But as he glanced out the window, a prickle of unease crawled up his spine. The street felt too still, the shadows too sharp. In New York, Helena Crawford sat in her penthouse office, a glass of wine in one hand, a photograph in the other. The image showed William sweeping the cafe floor, his face tired but focused. Her private investigator's report was thorough. William Crawford, heir to Crawford Investments, was playing busboy in a rundown Atlanta cafe. Helena's lips curled into a cold smile. "So this is where he's hiding," she murmured. "Pathetic." She stepped into a waiting black SUV, its tinted windows shielding her from the world. The drive to Atlanta was long, but Helena didn't trust reports alone. She needed to see him, broken, humbled, failing. When the SUV parked across from Naomi's nook, she leaned forward, her eyes narrowing at the cafe's warm glow. "He thinks he can outlast me," she said to her assistant, a wiry man with a notepad. "Let's make sure he doesn't." She pulled out her phone and dialed a contact in Atlanta's city services, her voice smooth as ice. "I want that cafe gone. A failed inspection should do. Fine violations, expired licenses, faulty wiring, anything. Make it hurt." The assistant nodded, scribbling. "It'll be done, Mrs. Crawford." Inside the cafe, William's unease grew. He'd noticed small things over the past few days. A man in a dark coat lingering across the street, watching too long. A city official's business card tucked under the door after hours, no explanation attached. He'd spent enough time in boardrooms to recognize the signs of a setup. Someone was circling, and he had a sinking feeling he knew who. Naomi, oblivious to the brewing storm, moved through her routine with her usual quiet strength. But William saw the strain in her eyes, the way her hands lingered on the counter, as if anchoring herself to the cafe. It was her sanctuary, her legacy for Caleb, and every creak of its old floors carried her heart. William swept the floor in silence, his mind racing. He couldn't tell her about Helena, not without breaking his father's will. But he couldn't let her lose this place either. The next morning, a city inspector arrived, clipboard in hand, his face unreadable. Naomi greeted him with a polite smile, but William saw her fingers tighten around her apron. The inspector paced the cafe, jotting notes with deliberate slowness. "Expired health permit," he said, pointing to a framed certificate. Faulty wiring in the back. And this kitchen vent, it's not up to code. Naomi's face paled. Those were fine last year, she said, her voice steady but thin. I've kept everything in order. The inspector shrugged. You've got 3 violations. Fines total $12,000, due in 10 days, or we shut you down. $12,000? Naomi's voice cracked. I don't have that kind of money. You'll need to figure it out, he said, handing her a notice before walking out. The cafe felt colder after he left. Caleb sat at his usual table, sketching, unaware of the blow. Naomi stared at the notice, her hands trembling. William wanted to speak, to promise he'd fix it, but his tongue felt heavy. He busied himself with the espresso machine, his heart pounding. He'd seen Helena's tactics before. Bribes, pressure, quiet sabotage. This had her fingerprints all over it. That night, after Caleb was asleep in the back room, Naomi sat alone at the counter, the notice crumpled in her hand. William was mopping when he heard a soft sob. He froze, his chest tightening. Naomi's head was bowed, tears streaking her face as she whispered, "This place was all I had left." The words cut deeper than any boardroom loss. William had watched deals collapse, fortunes shift, but this, Naomi's quiet despair, was a pain he couldn't quantify. He slipped into the storage room, his hands shaking as he pulled out his phone. A hidden account, a last remnant of his wealth, held $20,000. Money he'd kept secret even from Helena. It was his safety net, but Naomi needed it more. He made the call, his voice low. "I need a transfer. $15,000, anonymous, to clear the fines for Naomi's Nook Cafe. No trace to me." The banker, an old ally from his Manhattan days, didn't ask questions. By dawn, the transaction was done. The next morning, Naomi arrived early, her eyes red but determined. She unlocked the cafe, expecting another fight, but found a letter slipped under the door. She tore it open, her breath catching. The city had reassessed the violations, the fines were waived, and the cafe could stay open. No explanation, just a stamp of approval. Naomi clutched the letter, a shaky laugh escaping her. "Miracles still happen," she whispered, her voice thick with relief. She turned to the counter, where Caleb was already setting out napkins, oblivious to the weight that had lifted. William stood in the doorway, watching silently. His heart swelled at her smile, but it ached too, knowing the cost. The $15,000 was nearly all he had left, a sacrifice he couldn't explain without revealing his past. Naomi caught his gaze and tilted her head, curious. "You look like you saw a ghost, Mr. Will." He forced a smile, his voice soft. "Just glad you're okay." She nodded, her eyes lingering on him, as if sensing the truth he couldn't share. "Thanks for sticking around," she said, then turned to start the coffee maker. Outside, the black SUV was gone, but Helena's shadow lingered. She sat in a hotel suite across town, her phone buzzing with the inspector's report. "The fines were paid," he said. "No record of who." Helena's smile faltered, her fingers tightening around her glass. "He's playing a dangerous game," she muttered. "Let's see how long his little haven lasts." For William, the cafe's warmth was a fragile shield against the storm he knew was coming. But as he watched Naomi laugh with Caleb, pouring coffee with her steady hands, he felt something stronger than fear. A resolve to protect this place, and the woman who'd given him a home. The morning sun filtered through the windows of Naomi's Nook Cafe, casting soft shadows across the worn wooden tables. The scent of fresh coffee mingled with the warmth of baking bread, a fragile cocoon of normalcy after the storm of the city's threats. Naomi Young hummed softly as she arranged pastries in the display case. Her relief from the mysteriously waived fines still a quiet glow in her chest. Miracles still happen, she'd whispered, unaware of the cost. William Crawford stood at the coffee machine, his movements steadier now, pouring espresso with a focus that hid the weight of his secret sacrifice. But outside, Atlanta's streets held their breath, and the shadow of Manhattan loomed closer. Mid-morning, a regular, a college student with a backpack, left behind a glossy magazine on the counter. Naomi barely noticed it at first, her hands busy wiping down the counter. But as she reached to toss it into the lost and found bin, the cover caught her eye, missing millionaire William Crawford, the heir who vanished. The headline was bold, but it was the face that stopped her cold. Those sharp blue eyes, steady and unmistakable, stared back from the page. They were the same eyes that greeted her every morning, hidden behind an apron and a tired smile. Naomi's breath hitched. Her fingers trembled as she opened the magazine, scanning the article. William Crawford, 35, heir to Crawford Investments, vanished from New York 6 months ago. Family fortune at stake. The words blurred, but the truth cut through like a knife. She glanced at William, now wiping down a table, his broad shoulders hunched with a humility she'd mistaken for honesty. Her heart pounded, a mix of betrayal and disbelief tightening her throat. She clutched the magazine, her mind racing. Caleb was at school, thank God, spared from this moment. The cafe buzzed with its usual rhythm, Earl sipping his pie, the librarian scribbling notes, but it felt like the air had thinned. Naomi's sanctuary, her home, suddenly felt like a stage for someone else's game. William returned from a delivery run, the bell above the door jingling as he stepped inside, his hoodie damp from a light drizzle. He sensed the shift immediately. Naomi's stillness, the way her hands gripped the counter. "Everything okay?" he asked, his voice cautious. Naomi turned, holding up the magazine, her eyes blazing. "Who are you, really?" The question landed like a punch. William froze, his gaze dropping to the cover. His own face stared back, a polished version of the man he'd left behind in Manhattan. His stomach churned. He'd known this moment might come, but not like this. Not with Naomi's trust hanging in the balance. "Naomi, I can explain," he said, stepping closer, his hands raised as if to calm a storm. "Then explain," she snapped, her voice low but sharp. "Because this says you're some kind of billionaire playing pretend in my cafe." He took a breath, the weight of his father's will pressing down. "It's true," he said quietly. "My name is William Crawford. My father's will. It forced me to live without my fortune for a year, to survive on my own, to hide who I am. If I don't, I lose everything to my stepmother, Helena. She's the one who sent the inspectors, who tried to shut you down." Naomi's eyes widened, then narrowed. "So you knew? About the fines, the sabotage?" "I suspected," he admitted. "That's why He stopped, catching himself. The $15,000 he'd paid to save the cafe was a secret he couldn't share, not now. "I didn't want you to lose this place." Her laugh was bitter, cutting. "So everything this cafe, my son, it was all some kind of lesson for you? A game to prove you could play poor?" "No," William pleaded, his voice breaking. He stepped closer, desperate to make her understand. "This was the first real life I ever had. You, Caleb, this place, you gave me something I didn't know I needed. I'm not that man in the magazine, not anymore." But Naomi's face was a mask of hurt, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. She'd trusted him, let him into her world, her son's world. And now, the man she'd called Mr. Wool was a stranger, a liar who'd turned her life into a chapter of his story. "You used us," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "You stood here, in my home, and lied to my face." "Naomi, please," he said, his heart splintering. "I never meant to hurt you." "Get out, William," she said, her voice trembling but firm. She turned away, clutching the magazine like a shield. William stood frozen, the weight of her words heavier than any loss he'd faced. The regulars glanced up, sensing the tension, but the cafe's warmth felt cold now, its glow dimmed. He wanted to fight, to explain, but the betrayal in Naomi's eyes was a wall he couldn't breach. Slowly, he untied his apron, folded it neatly on the counter, and walked to the door. The bell jingled as he stepped into the rain, the drizzle now a steady downpour. He didn't look back, but his reflection lingered in the cafe's window, a ghost fading into the grey. Naomi stood alone, the magazine crumpled in her hand, her sanctuary fractured by the truth. In New York, Helena Crawford sipped her wine, her phone buzzing with a new message from her investigator. "He's been exposed. The woman knows." Helena's smile was sharp, triumphant. "Good," she said. "Let's see how he crawls back now." But William didn't crawl. He walked head down, the rain soaking through his hoodie, carrying the ache of a life he'd come to love and lost. Behind him, Naomi's nook stood quiet, its neon sign flickering like a heartbeat in the storm. The rain had stopped, but the storm over Naomi's Nook Cafe was just beginning. William Crawford trudged through Atlanta's wet streets, his hoodie soaked, his reflection long gone from the cafe's window. Naomi's words, "Get out, William," echoed in his chest, sharper than the chill biting his skin. He'd found a cheap motel room, a flickering neon sign outside its door mocking the warmth of the cafe he'd lost. Sleep eluded him, guilt gnawing at his bones. He'd wanted to protect Naomi, to be more than the name on a magazine cover, but his silence had shattered her trust. By morning, the air crackled with a different kind of storm. Paparazzi vans lined the street outside Naomi's nook, their cameras flashing like vultures circling a wound. A headline screamed from a tabloid clutched by a reporter. "Wealthy heir deceives single mother into hiring him." The words twisted in William's gut as he watched from a corner store across the street, his hood pulled low. The article was venomous, painting Naomi as a naive victim and William as a manipulative playboy slumming it for kicks. Helena's hand was unmistakable. This was her final blow. Inside the cafe, Naomi stood frozen behind the counter, her face a mask of quiet devastation. The usual hum of regulars, Earl with his pie, the librarian with her tea, was gone. The tables sat empty, the air heavy with the absence of laughter. Outside, reporters shouted questions through the glass. "Naomi, did you know he was a millionaire? Was it all a lie?" She clutched the counter, her knuckles pale, fighting to keep her composure. Caleb was at school, but she'd already gotten a call from his teacher. Kids were whispering, taunting him about the rich man who'd fooled his mom. Her sanctuary, her home for lost souls, was now a spectacle, its heart exposed and bleeding. Naomi locked the door, flipping the open sign to closed. She sank onto a stool, her hands covering her face, the weight of humiliation crushing her. This cafe was her husband's dream, her promise to Caleb, and now it was a punchline on every newsstand. She didn't cry, she'd cried enough the night before, but her whispered prayer was a plea. "Why us? Across town, William sat in his motel room, the TV flickering with a morning talk show. Helena Crawford's face filled the screen, her smile polished and predatory. "My poor stepson is confused," she said, her voice dripping with false concern. "He's lost his way, but rest assured, Crawford Investments will soon be in responsible hands." The audience applauded, oblivious to the lie. Helena's eyes gleamed, her victory almost complete. William's fists clenched, guilt and rage warring within him. He'd lost everything, his fortune, his name, Naomi's trust, but seeing Helena twist the truth, dragging Naomi and Caleb through the mud, ignited something fiercer. He'd spent months hiding, playing by his father's rules, but no more. Naomi had given him a chance when he was nothing, seen him for his soul, not his status. He owed her more than a secret payment, more than silence. He owed her justice. He stood, his jaw set. The will's conditions be damned. He wouldn't let Helena destroy Naomi's life. He pulled out his phone, dialing a number he hadn't used in months. "It's William Crawford," he said to the voice on the other end, a trusted lawyer from his Manhattan days. "I need to call a board meeting." Now, over the next few days, William worked in the shadows, gathering evidence he'd kept buried. Financial records, emails, proof of Helena's corruption. She'd been siphoning funds from Crawford Investments for years, bribing officials, rigging deals. He'd turned a blind eye before, too caught up in his own pride, but now every document was a weapon. He contacted a journalist, a friend from his old life, and leaked just enough to stir whispers in the press. Naomi, meanwhile, faced the fallout alone. The cafe remained empty, its neon sign dark. Caleb came home with a bruised cheek, his sketchbook torn by bullies who called his mom a fool. "Why'd he lie, Mom?" Caleb asked, his voice small. Naomi pulled him close, her heart breaking, but she had no answers. She didn't know William had spent his last $15,000 to save her cafe, or that he was fighting for her now, miles away. In New York, the boardroom of Crawford Investments loomed like a battlefield. William arrived days later, his suit borrowed from a thrift shop, his face unshaven but resolute. Cameras lined the room, reporters hungry for the next chapter of the missing millionaire saga. The board members sat stiffly, their eyes flickering between William and Helena, who stood at the head of the table, her smile as cold as ever. William stepped forward, his voice steady, the weight of Naomi's trust and Caleb's laughter behind him. "I'm here to set the record straight," he said, his gaze locking onto Helena's. "This isn't about my inheritance. It's about truth." The cameras flashed, capturing the moment. Helena's smile faltered, just for a second, but William saw it. He was no longer the man who'd boarded a bus to Atlanta, broken and alone. Naomi had given him something worth fighting for, and he was ready to make his stand. The boardroom of Crawford Investments buzzed with tension, the air thick with camera flashes and the murmurs of reporters. William Crawford stood at the center, his thrift shop suit a stark contrast to the polished mahogany table and the board members' tailored attire. Helena Crawford sat at the head, her smile a brittle mask, her eyes glinting with the confidence of someone who'd never lost. But William's words, "This isn't about my inheritance. It's about truth," hung in the air, a challenge that silenced the room. He wasn't the broken man who'd fled Manhattan months ago. Naomi's nook had changed him, and now he was ready to fight for her. William stepped out of the boardroom and into a downtown press conference, the Atlanta skyline looming behind him through towering windows. Microphones crowded the podium, reporters jostling for the next scoop on the missing millionaire. His hands steadied as he gripped the podium, Naomi's face, her hurt, her strength, etched in his mind. This wasn't just about clearing his name. It was about restoring hers. He leaned into the microphones, his voice clear and resolute. "Naomi Young gave me a chance when I had nothing," he declared. "She didn't hire a millionaire. She hired a man trying to find his soul. Her cafe, her kindness, her son, they showed me what true wealth means. And I won't let lies destroy that." The crowd hushed, cameras clicking. William held up a stack of documents, financial records, emails, bank transfers, proof of Helena's corruption. "My stepmother, Helena Crawford, forged company accounts, bribed city officials, and staged a sabotage campaign to shut down Naomi's Nook Cafe. She didn't just attack me. She attacked a single mother, a small business, a community. This ends now." Gasps rippled through the room. Reporters scribbled furiously as William laid out the evidence. Helena's illicit transfers from Crawford Investments, her payments to the Atlanta inspector, her orchestrated media smear. He'd spent days with his lawyer and journalist ally, piecing together the paper trail she'd thought buried. Each document was a nail in her carefully constructed empire. In New York, the board convened an emergency meeting. Helena sat, her face pale, as the chairman read William's evidence aloud. "Mrs. Crawford," he said, his voice icy, "you're suspended, effective immediately, pending a full investigation." Her lips parted, but no words came. The cameras caught her exit, her pearls gleaming, but her composure shattered. The news spread like wildfire. Headlines shifted overnight. "Millionaire heir exposes stepmother's fraud replaced the tabloid venom." Public sympathy swung to Naomi, the single mother who'd been wronged. Social media buzzed with hashtags. Hashtag Save Miss Nook. Hashtag Justice for Naomi. Spurred by strangers who'd never set foot in her cafe, but felt her story in their bones. In Atlanta, delivery drivers, college kids, and old veterans rallied, vowing to bring her cafe back to life. William boarded a bus back to Atlanta, his suit swapped for his old hoodie, his heart pounding with a mix of hope and fear. He wasn't returning as William Crawford, heir to billions. He was returning as Mr. Will, the man who'd swept floors and fixed lights, who'd learned to live for something bigger than himself. Naomi's trust was broken, and he didn't know if he could mend it, but he had to try. In Atlanta, Naomi stood outside her cafe, the closed sign still dangling, its neon dark. Caleb clung to her side, his sketchbook tucked under his arm, his bruised cheek a fading reminder of the cruelty they'd endured. She'd kept the doors locked, unable to face the empty tables or the pitying stares. But that morning, as the sun broke through the clouds, a crowd gathered, neighbors, regulars, strangers holding signs. "We love Naomi's Nook." A local news van parked nearby, its camera trained on the scene. Naomi's breath caught as she unlocked the door, her hands trembling, but her head high. The bell jingled, and the crowd poured in, their voices filling the silence with warmth. Earl ordered his cherry pie, the librarian her tea, and new faces, drawn by the news, lined up for coffee and pastries. Caleb's eyes widened, a grin breaking through his shyness as he helped set out napkins. William arrived quietly, his hoodie damp from the walk. He stood at the edge of the crowd, watching Naomi move through the cafe, her strength a beacon. She hadn't seen him yet, and he didn't push forward. This was her moment, her triumph. The news cameras captured her smile, the way she hugged Caleb, the way the cafe pulsed with life again. Single mother reopens cafe after millionaire's redemption, the headlines would read. Naomi glanced up, her eyes meeting William's across the room. For a moment, the noise faded, and it was just them, the woman who'd given him a chance, and the man who'd found his soul because of her. He nodded, a silent promise to make amends, not with money, but with time, with truth. She didn't smile, not yet, but her gaze softened, a flicker of possibility in the storm they'd weathered. The cameras missed it, but William held on to it, a spark of hope in the heart of Naomi's nook. The sun dipped low over Atlanta, painting the sky in hues of gold and pink, its light spilling through the windows of Naomi's Nook Cafe. A week had passed since the cameras captured Naomi Young reopening her doors, her head high, her heart bruised but unbroken. The cafe thrummed with life again, its tables crowded with regulars, friends, and strangers drawn by her story. The air buzzed with laughter, the clink of coffee mugs, and the warmth of a community reborn. Naomi moved through the chaos with her steady grace, her braided hair swaying as she poured coffee and passed out pastries. But her eyes, still wary, carried the shadow of betrayal. Outside, William Crawford stood under the neon sign, its pink and blue glow flickering like a heartbeat. He'd watched Naomi's triumph from the edges, her glance in the crowd a fragile spark of hope. He'd exposed Helena, saved the cafe, but the ache of Naomi's words, "Get out, William," lingered. He wasn't the heir to Crawford Investments anymore, not in his heart. He was Mr. Will, the man who'd swept her floors, who'd found a home in her kindness. Today, he'd come to earn it back. He pushed open the door, the bell jingling softly. Naomi looked up from the counter, her hands pausing mid-pour. The regulars, Earl with his cherry pie, the librarian with her tea, glanced over, their chatter fading. William wore his old apron, its coffee stains a map of the weeks he'd belonged here. He met Naomi's gaze, his blue eyes steady, no longer hiding. "Table 6 still needs wiping," he said, a small smile tugging at his lips, his voice carrying the warmth of their old rhythm. Naomi stared, her breath catching. The memory of his lies stung, but so did the memory of his quiet fixes. The espresso machine, the flickering lights, the way he'd made Caleb laugh. She blinked back tears, a laugh breaking through, soft and raw. "You're impossible," she said, her voice trembling with relief and something deeper. William stepped closer, his smile softening. "Maybe," he said, "but I'm yours if you'll have me." Before Naomi could respond, a small figure burst from the back room, his sketchbook clutched tight. "Mom, he's back," Caleb shouted, his eyes wide with joy. He barreled into William, wrapping his arms around his waist. "Mr. Will, you didn't leave." William knelt, ruffling Caleb's curls, his throat tight. "Not for good, kid," he said, his voice thick. "Not if you and your mom will let me stay." Naomi crossed the room, her apron flecked with flour, her eyes glistening. The crowd watched, sensing the moment's weight, but it was just them now. Naomi, William, and Caleb. She reached out, her hand finding William's, and pulled him into an embrace. It was fierce, dissolving months of pain, of secrets, of storms. Caleb squeezed between them, his laughter a bright thread weaving them together. "I'm sorry," William whispered into her hair. "For the lies, for the hurt. I didn't know what home was until you showed me." Naomi pulled back, her eyes searching his. "You broke my trust," she said, her voice steady but soft. "But you fought for us. That means something." She paused, a smile breaking through her tears. You better not spill the coffee this time. William laughed, the sound lighter than it had been in years. No promises, he teased, and the cafe erupted in cheers, Earl raising his coffee mug like a toast. The moment stretched, warm and whole, the neon sign outside casting its glow over the scene. News cameras lingered at the edges, capturing the reunion, but for Naomi, it wasn't about the headlines. It was about the man who'd come back, not with money or promises of power, but with a heart laid bare. For William, it was about the woman who'd seen him when he was nothing, who'd taught him that true wealth wasn't in a bank account, but in the people who made you whole. As the evening wound down, the cafe glowed brighter than ever, its tables full, its spirit unbroken. Naomi and William worked side by side, pouring coffee, wiping tables, their rhythm seamless again. Caleb sketched at his corner table, his drawing now of the three of them, a family taking shape in pencil and hope. The neon sign above Naomi's Nook Cafe glowed steady now, its pink and blue light a beacon in Atlanta's early morning haze. Months had passed since the cameras captured Naomi Young and William Crawford's reunion, their embrace a quiet promise kept. The cafe hummed with life, regulars like Earl with his cherry pie, new faces drawn by the story of a single mother's triumph, and Caleb's laughter weaving through the chatter. Naomi moved with her usual grace, her apron flecked with flour, but her eyes held a new spark. Not just resilience, but joy. William worked beside her, his hands steadier now, pouring coffee without a single spill. Their rhythm was a dance, seamless and sure, a testament to the trust they'd rebuilt. Outside, the city buzzed with change. Naomi's Nook had grown beyond its modest walls, expanding to 2 new locations across Atlanta. Naomi stood at the helm, not as an employee scraping by, but as the CEO of her own small empire. William had offered his business acumen, not the billionaire's checkbook, but the quiet wisdom he'd honed in boardrooms and now tempered with humility. He helped negotiate leases, streamline operations, and design a logo that made Caleb beam with pride. "It's got Mom's strength in it," the boy had said, and Naomi had laughed, pulling him close. Together, they launched the Young Hearts Foundation, a non-profit born from their shared vision. Its mission was simple but profound, offering small business grants to single parents, giving them the chance Naomi had fought for. At the foundation's opening, a modest event in the original cafe, William stood beside her, his thrift shop suit replaced with a simple button-down, his smile unguarded. Community leaders, reporters, and single parents filled the room, their stories echoing Naomi's own. A delivery driver starting a food truck, a nurse opening a daycare. The air thrummed with hope, the kind that outshone any fortune. In New York, Helena Crawford faced a different fate. Her trial for fraud dominated headlines, her carefully curated empire unraveling under the weight of William's evidence. Forged accounts, bribed officials, and sabotaged businesses. She'd built a legacy of greed, and now it crumbled. In court, her pearls gleamed, but her eyes were hollow, her smirk gone. William, called as a witness, could have pushed for jail time, could have let vengeance guide him. Instead, he looked at her, his stepmother, once a shadow over his life, and said, "Justice isn't revenge. It's release." He walked away, leaving her to the consequences of her choices, his heart lighter than it had been in years. Back at the foundation's opening, the crowd parted as Caleb bounded forward, his sketchbook tucked under his arm. He'd grown taller, his curls wilder, but his grin was the same. He hugged William, then looked up, his voice clear and proud. "Hey, Dad," he said, the words slipping out as naturally as a breath. William froze, his throat tight. Naomi's eyes glistened, her hand finding Caleb's shoulder. The room didn't notice, but for the three of them, the world shifted. William knelt, pulling Caleb into a hug, his voice barely a whisper. "I'm here, kid. Always." Naomi joined them, her arms encircling them both, a family forged not by blood, but by choice. As the event wound down, the sun rose over Atlanta, its golden light spilling across the cafe's windows. The city woke, unaware of the quiet miracle unfolding inside. William had come to Naomi's nook looking for work, a desperate man stripped of his fortune, bound by a will's strange demands. But what he found was worth more than any inheritance. A woman whose kindness rebuilt him, a boy who called him Dad, a community that showed him what mattered. Naomi stood by the counter, watching the sunrise paint the cafe in warmth. William joined her, his hand brushing hers, their fingers intertwining. She looked at him, her smile radiant, her eyes reflecting the man he'd become. "Funny thing," she whispered, her voice soft but sure. "The day I hired a poor man was the day my life became rich."